Welcome everybody. My name is Jade Thorne and I am a director of Portrush Heritage Group. I'd like to welcome you all, whether you're watching from in this room, near or far, and we thank you for your attendance. I would like to extend a very special welcome to our speakers this evening. We have Francis Wilson and Raymond McGrattan. Raymond is deputising for his father Hugh, who is unfortunately unable to attend for medical reasons. We wish him a very speedy recovery back to full health. Their subjects this evening have one similarity in that they both are about unsung heroes. I'll get back to this in a little bit. Also tonight, you're not going home empty-handed. We have your copy of our Discover Portrush magazine issue number 7, which is available for collection as you leave this evening. There's more. Joe Mahan described Hugh McGrattan's book, The Port on the Promontory, I have a copy here, as the definitive history of Portrush. Sadly, obtaining a copy of this book has been near impossible for years. That is, until we, John, discovered copies in the store at Impact Printing's offices in Ballycastle. So, with Hugh's blessing, you can purchase a copy this evening on leaving, if you have not already got one, at the very reasonable price of £10. An ideal Christmas gift for the people who have everything. Perfect. We'd also like to remind you that the Heritage Group 2024 subscriptions are due on the 1st of January, and at £15 this is amazing value. Our thanks go to everyone who have supported us through membership, which has brought us up to over 200 members. As we have said many times, your support strengthens the voice of the importance of preserving the heritage of our community. We all have our stories, hidden and unhidden. We must protect and make available these stories as they are our heritage, and heritage matters. It is our identity. Before we get into tonight's programme, I'd like to show you a slide of East Strand. There it is. And I would specifically draw your attention to Strandmore House, which has since been hugely redeveloped. Strandmore House, together with the nearby Craigvara House, was built around 1860 by local philanthropist Miss Rebecca Rice. Rebecca was responsible for the planning, financing and supervising the construction of the first promenade from the East Strand to the salmon fishery as a relief scheme for some local fishermen during hard times. In 1940, the house was owned by Dr. Bolton and his wife Zara. Dr. Bolton was captain of Royal Portrush Golf Club, and his wife was captain and president of the ladies' branch. Mrs. Bolton was also a successful international and Curtis Cup player. In August 1940, John Fitzgerald Kennedy and his father Joseph visited Strandmore House whilst on a trip to Ireland. At the time, Joseph Kennedy was the American ambassador to London, and the story goes that Dr. Bolton and JFK shared a mutual friend. The friend told JFK to make sure to visit Dr. Bolton if ever he was in Ireland. Arrangements were duly made, and the Kennedys enjoyed afternoon tea at Strandmore House during their trip. Sadly, on this day 60 years ago, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, was assassinated while riding in a presidential motorcade through Dallas, Texas. We remember JFK. All of that information comes from our website, Discover Portrush, where there is a huge fountain of knowledge there for you to read about JFK and many other famous visitors to Portrush. So, before introducing tonight's speakers, our Vice Chairman, John, there he is, John Moore will provide a short update on 2 issues that we are very concerned about. The first is the Council's move to dispose of what was the first national school in Portrush, now referred to as Quigley's Cottage, and the second is the dereliction at Lansdowne Crescent, which was recently described in the Council's Lansdowne Master Plan as an exceptionally fine terrace of Victorian townhouses. Times have changed. So, John Moore, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that. There is somebody out there, that's good. I'm sure that many of you will agree with the directors that the dereliction of properties in Lansdowne Crescent and other parts of Portrush reflect badly on the town, and is a state of affairs that should not be allowed to continue. Nor should the replacement of such fine houses with modern concrete blocks of apartments be permitted by our planning authorities. Lansdowne Crescent, the last great Victorian terrace of houses to be constructed in Portrush. Erected from about 1885, these were large, impressive houses owned by important people in the town. The terrace was to give its name to this entire area of Portrush, such was its impact on the town. Initially anchored at its southern end from around 1885 by Robert Lee's pioneering photography studio and his Lansdowne Hotel, by the mid-1890s, the terrace was to include large private houses and the Church of Ireland rectory. By 1890, the Tower House had replaced the photography studio which had been wrecked in a storm in 1888. The Lansdowne Hotel was next to it, and the terrace of private houses would later evolve into a terrace of fine hotels and guest houses. Starting with the renowned Skerryban Hotel, we had the Ormond, the Alexandra, the Oakdean, Claremont, Wincliffe, to name but a few. An elegant and desirable place to live or stay on holiday, and a provider of fine venues for local gatherings, such as annual dinners and wedding receptions. During the 1950s and 60s, the houses continued to be a well-kept terrace, guest houses, hotels, and that remained the case for most of the remaining years of the 20th century, although some changes in use occurred and the cracks of decay began to show. Sadly, if it was just that easy, sadly, time and modern developers have taken their toll on this fine terrace. Tower House has been demolished and replaced by apartments. The Skerryban Hotel lost in a fire, and the site lying vacant for decades. Many other properties apparently abandoned and decaying through lack of maintenance, renovation, or redevelopment. Not least, the first Church of Ireland rectory in the town, once a family home, now decaying and derelict. A few others have been well looked after and redeveloped as apartments. One has reopened as a hotel, the Elephant Rock, whose owners are to be commended because they retained the original building and renovated it for their purposes. However, what we're left with overall is a scene of dereliction and decay, a site which does no credit to Portrush or to the owners of the empty properties and vacant sites. One has to ask why these vacant sites and buildings and others on Main Street and Causeway Street have not been maintained or redeveloped. Why have we been left with these eyesores of dereliction? Why has the site of the old Skerryban Hotel lain vacant for so long? Who are the owners of these sad buildings, and why have they allowed their properties to fall into their current state? Neglect of properties across the town is evident. Most are probably owned by developers who have yet to make a start on their repair redevelopment. We feel that our council planning authorities must start insisting on any redevelopment being in character with its surroundings and retaining the look and style of the surrounding buildings. Portrush does not need any more blocks of apartments. We already have too many, and they're destroying the character and period style of the town. Portrush is a prime holiday destination, but you might be forgiven for thinking otherwise when you look at the decay and dereliction here in Lansdowne and in other areas of the town. If we must have apartments, let them be built behind the original facades or behind exact copies of the original facades and to the same height and roof style of the original and adjacent buildings. To my mind, the question is, does Portrush need more second homes? The answer surely is no. It needs more affordable housing for young people who were born and raised in this town, who wish to marry, settle, and create a community in the town. It needs more hotel and guest house accommodation for visitors. Your directors propose to raise this matter with Causeway Coast and Glens Council and all councillors to awaken them to their responsibilities under current legislation and to start using the powers that they already have under heritage. These include the control of alterations, extensions, and demolition of listed buildings, conservation area designation and management, enforcement of notices on listed buildings, issuing of building preservation notices, and issuing notices to require urgent works to preserve a building. I think some of our councillors haven't read that bit of the legislation. They're also responsible for community listing properties of special architectural or historic interest. In addition to our approach to the council, we're also producing a video to highlight this entire issue, and this will be live on our YouTube channel quite soon. We hope to show it at the next meeting. As part of our case to the council, we wish to create a petition supporting our arguments, and we're asking all of you to sign that petition this evening. There are copies of it have been circulated. If you haven't signed it, it'll be at the desk on your way out. Please do sign the petition, I'll put the teeth back in, and strengthen our voice. Okay, moving quickly on to my next topic. Ballywillen National School, the preservation thereof. Like so many other buildings of historical interest in the Portrush area, people drive or walk past this building without being aware of its historical significance, perhaps only remarking on its quaintness or unusual windows. That's where it's located. The building is Ballywillen National School, Portrush, also known by the council as Quigley's Cottage, shown on the ordnance map I had up a second ago, sorry. That's it there, at the cemetery. It is located in the Macroboy Road, almost opposite the original entrance gates of the new Ballywillen Cemetery. We are concerned that the council are again planning to put the property up for sale, as they no longer use it as a store for use by the cemetery workers, and they've had it valued at £90,000. The former school building should be preserved, as it is important historically due to its original use as a place of education, its connection to and co-location with the now ruined Ballywillen Church, its place in the social and economic history of Portrush, and it being the first proper school in Portrush, and consequently the oldest school building still standing in the Portrush area. The Ordnance Survey Memoirs of Ireland for the parish of Ballywillen refers to it as the Ballywillen Parish School and states that it was established in 1829. The school would have been integrated into the new national school system introduced into Ireland in 1831, thus explaining why it appears on maps as national school. Unfortunately, it has been much modified by our council. The lancet windows, the gutters, and the concrete roof verges are not original. However, it would not be difficult to return the school to its original form if required. In its original form, it might have looked like this, possibly without the shutters. The building was the first proper school in the town and would have remained in use until 1853, when two new schools for male and female were established next to the new church on Main Street. It is recorded that in 1835 it had 15 male and 20 female pupils, and although it was a Church of Ireland parish school, all were Presbyterians. Church of Ireland weren't keen on education. The school building is surrounded on three sides by the cemetery to roughly half the height of walls. There are several nearby graves close to the school walls, and we do not know how many other graves unmarked may lie in the area surrounding the school. To attempt any work, such as the removal of the school to replace it with something else, would risk desecration of those graves and damage to headstones and surrounds. The land surrounding the school is consecrated and should not be disturbed. We would wish to see the school preserved as a community asset. It is unlikely to be appropriate for housing, having no surrounding land and opening directly onto a busy road. It does not cost the council anything to keep it present, and in time a practical use may be found for it. Sorry, I've got behind myself, there we go. We have also identified and would like to undertake a project in the graveyard itself. The project would identify, locate and catalogue all the graves. We would identify persons of interest and undertake research into them. And finally, we would compile a database which could be accessed through the website and used by anyone who's researching either local history or their local roots. Our initial plan is to survey the graveyard, locate and identify every grave and record, both manually and photographically, all information on the headstones or other markers. The area will then be divided into zones, with each zone being surveyed separately by a team of 2 or 3 people. Teams will be able to work at their own speed and spread the work over several visits, albeit within the overall programme for the survey. This is where you, our members, come into the picture. That awful word, we need volunteers to undertake the work along with the directors. If we have enough volunteers, it should not take too long to gather the information, and consequently the time each of us have to spend on the task will be shorter. To that end, I've left a small form in your seat or near your seat, and if you would like to join us in the project, please complete the form this evening and let me have it before you leave. Anyone watching on Zoom who wishes to help, please email the chairman with your contact details. His address is on the website. Returning to my main topic, we hope to work with the council to retain and preserve the school building. We already have support from several councillors and from the Heritage Lottery Fund. It is our intention to make a short presentation to the relevant council committee to persuade them not to sell the property but to retain it as a piece of our heritage. If any of you feel strongly about this matter, or more importantly perhaps have family connections in the graveyard, you would strengthen our arguments by writing to the Chief Executive of the Council, Mr. David Jackson, expressing your concerns regarding heritage or desecration or both, and asking Council to retain the school in public ownership and preserve it for future generations. Finally, a reminder that we need volunteers for the project. So please do complete the form and hand it to me. And please also sign the petition, which has been passing around and will be at the desk on your way out if you haven't signed it, regarding the dereliction and decay of properties within the town. Thank you.
So So our first speaker this evening, Frances Wilson, is no stranger to those who read our magazines, as she has provided features on the Portrush Switchback Railway, sport in the Metropole Field at the turn of the last century, our majestic cinema, and the Winter Gardens Company. Frances is a native of London, but has lived in Portstewart for over 40 years. Now retired from teaching business studies at the former Korean Tech, she enjoys researching local history, especially topics relating to the outdoors. Tonight, Frances has her feet firmly on the ground, but unfortunately, this could not be said for her subject, Per Lindstrand, who, when he set off in the Branson Balloon 36 years ago to fly across the Atlantic, did not expect to have his life saved by some unsung locals. Frances, over to you.
Thank you. Well, as Jade said earlier on, there is a theme to tonight's meeting. And from my aspect, looking at it is from the point of view of flying, although for various different reasons. Right. Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Yeah. So in this case, we are looking at two men who decided to gain notoriety for themselves by getting their names in the Guinness Book of Records, as it was then known. This is a bit of a spoiler alert, because you're now going to realize that not everything went according to plan. So who was involved in this adventure? Well, the two of them, Richard Branson on the left, a British entrepreneur and connected with the Virgin brand. And on the right-hand side, Per Lindstrand, an aeronautical engineer and pilot from Sweden. Now, Branson already had the record for crossing the Atlantic in the fastest time in a boat. And Lindstrand felt with his background, he could create something which would enable them to be the fastest across by air. So that got the team together. The second thing they needed then was the equipment to get across. Now, Lindstrand, with his background, designed a balloon to take them across. The upper part of the balloon is known as the envelope, and this was made of black and silver laminated fabric. It featured the Virgin logo and was at that time the largest hot air balloon in existence. It was estimated to be the height of a 21-story building. Now, there aren't too many of them near here, but if you remember the tower block at the old Coleraine Tech, sadly now gone, that was 7 stories. So we're talking 3 times the height of that. Now, at the bottom there, you can see the capsule, and you can see the ratio between the balloon and the capsule. The capsule itself was approximately 7 feet high. To the right-hand side is one of the propane gas tanks, which would be used to provide the hot air. And Branson and Lindstrand were inside the cabin with all their equipment, and it was obviously pressurized because they were going to be at altitude. So we have the team and we have the equipment, and now we have the route. To achieve the crossing of the Atlantic, the rules stated that they had to take off from the west-hand side of the Atlantic from land, and they had to touch down somewhere in Europe on either land or fresh water. They were not allowed to come down on the sea. So this, their original route, Sugarloaf in Maine to Glasgow. So they took off at 8:10 on the 2nd of July, and initially they had a bit of a setback because they lost one of the fuel tanks. But then after that, they got the balloon up to an altitude of some 27,000 feet, and they got into the jet stream, and everything went according to plan. The jet stream took them across towards Glasgow. After about About 200 miles before they reached Glasgow, things started to go wrong. And once they started to go wrong, they continued to go wrong. The first thing that happened was that the weather deteriorated. And from flying in calm and clear conditions, they got into high winds, turbulence, and the balloon became surrounded by a lot of cloud. Now, the fact that they couldn't see below them immediately caused problems because they were having to make a descent almost blind. They then were given a message that Glasgow was fog-bound. So there was no point going there, and they were told that they must touch down in Northern Ireland in order to achieve the record. At first, they couldn't get the balloon to go down. Lindstrand, who was the main pilot, attempted to reduce the amount of air so that they could descend, but nothing happened. Then all of a sudden, they went down very, very quickly and ended up in a field near Limavady. At this point, it became obvious that the ratio of the balloon to the capsule was going to cause a lot of problems, and the balloon speeded on, dragging the capsule behind it. It went through a wall and damaged a cottage just outside Limavady. The next thing was they came towards power lines, which obviously wasn't the best thing to meet. So at that point, Lindstrand quickly had to get the balloon back up again. Now, they were assuming that the fact that they had touched down, however briefly, in Northern Ireland, that they would have achieved the record. So their main task now was to get down and get out of the balloon safely, because they were starting to realize that it wasn't just going to be as easy to get the balloon to stay still. The balloon would keep moving. So they then realized that the balloon had been quite badly damaged through dragging through this wall. 2 more fuel tanks were lost, and you can see on that left picture the state of which they were in, being dragged along the ground. And just on the right-hand side to show you the sort of the scale of those fuel tanks with the men who found them. They then decided that the easiest place to put down was going to be somewhere like Portrush Beach, where there was plenty of room. And the fact that they were going to be near the water near the seawater didn't matter. They'd already got their record. However, as they approached Portrush, the wind increased and it started to blow them away from the land and the beach out almost to the Skerries. The balloon came down just off the back of the Skerries, and again, the balloon kept moving and it was dragging the capsule. Lindstrand, who had obviously designed this, tried to release the balloon from the capsule, which had a mechanism. And although he activated this, it didn't work. So the balloon was carrying along, keeping on dragging the capsule no matter what he did. So he then thought that if this carried on, they were going to be in danger of drowning. Or if the balloon went up with this mechanism which he had activated, would it then release the capsule when they were halfway up? So he said to Branson, we need to get out now. So Lindstrand was near the front to get out, and he leapt out into the water, see there, but before Branson could get into the position to leap, the fact that Lindstrand's weight had gone off the balloon, it had then all went up again. So we had Lindstrand in the water and Branson in the air. So our story now is in 2 parts. Branson is up there with everything he needs, but maybe less ability to fly the balloon. Lindstrand is in the water wearing simply what either overalls or a flying suit. He had nothing else, no life jacket, no flares, nothing. And at this point, a 3rd person enters our story. And this is our local hero, Nigel Lynch. Nigel had seen the balloon go across Port Stewart earlier in the afternoon, thought no more about it, there's the balloon. And when he had finished work, he came across to Portrush to meet his mate, Chris Allen, and the two of them were to go out diving. So they were in the Portrush Harbour getting the boat ready, and they happened to get talking to a couple of fishermen who said that they had been out fishing beyond the Skerries and they'd seen the balloon go over, partially land, and then they had seen something fall from the balloon. But they were far too busy to go and see what this might be. Now, fortunately for Lindstrand, Nigel wasn't as busy, because he then decided that he would like to go and see what had fallen off the balloon. And technology willing, I'll let you hear what he said.
Something fell off that balloon. Come on, we'll do a wee salvage exercise. Right. I says, you know, he said to me, well, this is Chris Allen and other people on the boat. And Chris says to me, do you know where? I said, it must have been the far end. If they were at the back of Skerries, it must have been right towards the far end of Skerries at touchdown. So we were about to jump on the boat, and young Paul Thompson, he would have sort of run after me a wee bit at that time. And I says, come on with us. And just happened, Lynn McDonald was there too. All right. And then says, where are you boys at? And I said, we're going out to see what fell off the balloon. Yeah. She jumped on as well, and the four of us headed out. But we'd only about a 3/4 can of fuel. So we weren't out. We could get about halfway to the Port Balloon trade direction and back again. That would be it. So we got to the end of the Skerries. There's no sign of anything, nothing. And headed on a bit further towards Iron Man, out a wee bit from Iron Man. And then we seen a helicopter way off, well, just a dot in the sky. It would have been a couple of miles out, probably off the Giant's Causeway, further round from the Giant's Causeway. But we didn't know what it was doing. And then I says, we'll go another 2-3 minutes and then we'll have to come back. Mm. So we were heading out, and I would have a very good eye for things in the water. Mm. And I said, there's something in the water just ahead of us. And it started to slow down, and sure enough, I seen this head. It was a head, a person. Yeah. But still nothing clicked balloon, because the balloon had gone 2 hours beforehand. And I said, what's going on here? And by that stage, the helicopter must have seen our boat coming at speed. So they'd come towards us, and he was watching the helicopter, so he didn't see us. And I said, but he had nothing on. He had a pair of underpants on, basically.
That was it.
That was it.
About bare chest?
Bare chest, nothing on. So I said, are we involved in bloody naval exercise here? If they drop this boy in, they're going to pick him up, or what's going on here? And we came right up behind him, and then Chris, you drive, he put in, and you're on it. As soon as I touched him, bang, I knew he was freezing cold. Right. And we got him in, and that was when the crack started. Of course, we had no radio. We didn't realise the helicopter, its winch was broke, so it couldn't lift him away. So it was a scenario of hand signals. The helicopter was pointing for the beach, and I was going, I'm for Portrush Harbour. So I was going harbour, so we took off at a lick and came back in with him.
So here we have the boat bringing Per Lindstrand back. The lads at the front, Nigel, Chris and Paul. Lindstrand in somebody's borrowed yellow jacket and his underpants. We discovered later that the reason for that was because he'd taken the suit off to spread it out on the water in the hope that it would attract somebody, either the lifeboat or a helicopter. But what, of course, was happening, everybody was looking up at the balloon, nobody was looking on the water. And then doing our best to warm him up is Lynn McDonald. So we can now go over and hear what Lindstrand thought about his rescue.
The water was cold, but I kept warm by swimming aggressively. The distance wasn't the problem. The temperature was of great concern, but the real problem was the tide. That got me a bit worried. The fact that I would still be swimming by the time it got darkness. but every third swell went over me. But it was big enough to stop you seeing a body in the water unless you specifically were looking into that area. In the end, the helicopter from HMS Argonaut turns up, and by circling me, it tracks a boat from Portrush.
Now, between Nigel bringing Lindstrand back into the harbour and the helicopter taking him, Nigel on the left and Chris brought the boat in, and then they helped Lindstrand up the small pontoon. Now, amazingly, after being in water for that length of time, he was able to walk and seemed to be, as Nigel put it, compos mentis, he seemed to know what was going on. They didn't realise that the helicopter was coming to get him. As Nigel said, he was absolutely freezing, so they were going to get him into the showers in the yacht club, try and get him warmed up. So Nigel was sending people running to look for 20 pence pieces to activate the showers. You've come all the way across the Atlantic and you've got to pay for a shower. But before they even had time to get the money together, the helicopter did some kind of nifty maneuver and got down on the North Pier. And you saw him being whisked away with the emergency blanket dragged off him before he went in and to be taken over to a hospital. So meanwhile, Branson is now up in the balloon on his own, and he said that when Lindstrand had jumped out, he never felt so lonely in all his life. He was not the better of the pilots, but he knew that his fate was in his own hand. There was nobody else to help him. He had what emergency equipment hadn't been damaged, but he still felt that maybe this was the time that he was going to die. And he apparently wrote a note to his wife, to his girlfriend and children. However, all credit to him, he got the balloon along towards Bull Point off Rathlin Island, and then managed to bring it down near to a naval frigate, HMS Argonaut, which was standing by ready to help. So he got out and the balloon came down, and fisherman Tommy Cecil from Rathlin Island saw all the activity going on and immediately came charging out in his boat and got his hook to the balloon and therefore claimed salvage of it ahead of the Royal Navy, who were a bit slow off the mark. And this proved to be actually quite financially beneficial to Rathlin Island. After a gentleman's agreement between Tommy Cecil and the Navy then took charge of it. He knew, Tommy Cecil knew that he had that. So Branson was put into the balloon, into the helicopter, and he and Lindstrand were reunited. Now, this was apparently quite emotional because Branson thought, obviously, he had leapt off, Lindstrand had leapt off into the water and had been in there for the best part of 2 hours. I mean, what chance would most of us have of surviving? But as I mentioned earlier, Lindstrand was Swedish, so he was used to cold water, he was used to swimming in cold water, and he knew how to conserve his energy and not to try and fight the tide. He mentioned the tide earlier on and it going over his head, but even so, in the little video clip we'll see later on, he reckoned he hadn't much longer, to be just there waiting for something to happen. Anyway, the two of them were reunited. Branson was put in a warm bath because he was only in the water for literally 10 minutes. They got him out straight away. And Lindstrand was treated for hypothermia and shock. All right. But both men made very good recovery, and their families were there to meet them, because remember, the original destination had been Glasgow, so their families were in Scotland. So the Guinness Book of Records confirmed that they had achieved the following 4 things: the first hot air balloon crossing of the Atlantic Ocean, the largest hot air balloon, the fastest traveling hot air balloon, and the longest distance traveled by a hot air balloon. Richard Branson loves being associated with superlatives. Anything that's big, biggest or highest or whatever, he's there. Anyway, they got the record for that. And this was just after 60 years, they were looking back at some of the monumental events. They had designed a souvenir so that people could, obviously it's an airmail envelope, people could post something across the Atlantic as well, although the destination is not quite where it should have been. And then, in grateful recognition to people of Rathlin, I mean, they'd salvaged his balloon, he gave them a donation of £25,000, which was partly to get the balloon back. And this was used to refurbish the tithe barn at the Manor House into what is known as the Branson Centre. He also went back to Rathlin amid quite a lot of publicity and gave them a rescue boat, aptly named the Atlantic Saviour, which he obviously needed. So that is the end of the little story, and then we'll just have a look at the Guinness Book of Records film.
One of the greatest challenges of the 20th century in aviation was to fly across the Atlantic in a hot air balloon. We finally saw it happen in 1987, thanks to two really iconic pioneers, Richard Branson and Per Lindstrand.
Well, look, I love adventure. I love trying to achieve things that haven't been achieved before. You know, the furthest anybody had been at that stage was 600 miles. The Atlantic's 3,500 miles. So it was a long, eventful, exciting flight.
Well, there was a certain drama. During the inflation and takeoff, we lost a fuel tank. Once we came across the Atlantic, we climbed up in the jet stream. It was remarkably smooth. And because everybody wanted to talk to me. We had the Concorde coming across, and that's certainly very noticeable. Getting a big bump, and we think, what the heck was that? We had a bad forecast for Scotland. We came in Northern Ireland. People said land in Northern Ireland because there's all the fog in Glasgow. So we came into land, but it was too quick, and there was power lines ahead, so we had to take off again. And then we decided to land in water. Having landed on land, the record was already set. Flying further would not give us any more credibility. So we landed in the water, and then the explosive balls that separate the envelope from the gondola didn't work. And started going up again. At that point, you don't know whether half worked, they will break later up in flight. So the best thing is to get out of there. So I dived down. And I shouted to Richard to dive out too. But he was a bit slow. By the time he got to the edge, the capsule was airborne, it was too late to jump. So he sailed up. I'm now in the water with nothing but my overall on. He's on the upper deck of the capsule with a life vest, with emergency rations and emergency transmitter, the whole lot. And I had nothing.
And so I climbed back into the capsule and decided to try to fly the beast down. So sat down and started flying it. And to my great relief, as I came through the clouds, I saw the HMS Argonaut and two helicopters and realized they would obviously see me. And I thought the best bet was to have a go at taking the balloon down as slowly as possible and then throwing myself off at about 40 feet and obviously making sure that I threw myself off downwind of it. So as we were coming down, I put the door back in and got rid of my parachute, got up onto the top, and fortunately at the right moment threw myself off into the water, which was freezing cold.
The helicopter from the ship, it was Argonaut that found me after 2 hours. At that point, it didn't bring down the cable with a sling and took me in. He was going around in a circle. What's he doing? I was about to show him my face, but my face hit a rubber dinghy with a couple of kids in that see me and the shoreline had come out. And they dragged me on board the boat and back into Portrush. But there was 2 hours, 12-degree water, and that is pretty, I would say, that probably was about 10, 15 minutes from getting in.
And we did achieve it. It was a rather dramatic ending, being pulled out of the sea by a helicopter. But that was my first experience, and And the Guinness World Record team were fantastic in their support and help.
Thank you very much, Francis. That was very entertaining. I loved hearing the history of that. I remember the day it happened, actually. I was a kid and I was walking up from the Cook Beach Club and could see all the furore out on the sea and thought, goodness, what is that? Did not know the background. Our second talk this evening has been prepared by Hugh McGrattan, who is a founder member of the Heritage Group. Hugh is a former local newspaper editor and an eminent local historian, writer of many excellent books about Portrush. As earlier mentioned, Hugh's book, Portrush, The Port on the Promontory, is available for purchase on the way out. And he has contributed a vast number of our publications, and his knowledge and energy for all things Portrush is immeasurable. His son Raymond has kindly agreed to read Hugh's tribute to a young Portrush Airman called Artie Pollock, who died on the 6th of November 1953. Artie is our second unsung hero tonight, and his tribute will be delivered to us by Raymond. Thank you.
I think agreed to do this is maybe a bit strong. Press gang didn't it might be a better phrase, to be honest. Folks, I would first like to thank John McNally and the Portrush Heritage Group for the opportunity to speak this evening on behalf of my father. Dad sends his sincerest apologies that he can't attend tonight, which is due to unforeseen circumstances. He would also like to apologise for being unable to locate a more suitable and worthy replacement speaker at such short notice. My mother is in the front row, my father is online, so there is absolutely no pressure on me at all. Knowing my father, I have no doubt that his presentation would have been peppered with fascinating anecdotes and nuggets of untold local knowledge, as is his style. I hope my more mediocre presentation style and lack of expertise will not detract from the audience's interest and enjoyment in tonight's subject matter. This is a story that my father has mentioned often over the years, and I hope to deliver it with the reverence and the recognition that both the subject and the man involved deserves. Having read over the script last night, it struck me that it combines a number of great interests held close to my father's heart, that being military history, Portrush itself, and indeed aviation. So if the audience will indulge me, I will give this talk in the first person. These are my father's words, and to alter them, I believe, would mar the perspective and the emotion contained therein. So, A Portrush Pilot Remembered, a tribute to Artie Pollock is the title. It is doubtful that more than a handful of Portrush people had ever heard of Arthur James, Artie Pollock, until last week's Chronicle article. I remember him, although he was 5 years my senior, for we both belonged to the Portrush Scouts, organised so excellently by the Reverend Henry Holloway, minister of Portrush Methodist Church. He was a patrol leader, me a mere wolf cub. I suppose I remember Artie particularly for his chosen career in the Royal Air Force was one that I would also have chosen, except that I had none of the qualities required, but which Artie had in abundance. But I also remember Artie as just a thoroughly nice guy. School prefects are not always recalled with high regard by those within their power, but Artie Pollock was genuinely liked and hugely respected by those in his charge. But 70 years ago, on the afternoon of the 6th of November 1953, Artie Pollock died in an air accident 3 miles above the city of Mönchengladbach, please excuse my pronunciation, in Western Germany. He was 20 years old. Artie Pollock had been flying fighters with the Royal Air Force for a year, and the aircraft he was piloting was a Canadair Sabre, then the world's most advanced combat aircraft. It was the RAF's premier fighter between 1953 and 1956. And in being selected to fly this swept-wing supersonic aircraft, right at the very start of his flying career, Artie Pollock had been clearly acknowledged as an exceptional pilot, one of an elite group of aviators. But a potentially brilliant career with the RAF came to a tragic and violent end when his aircraft collided with a jet from the same squadron. The other pilots successfully ejected, but Artie died when his aircraft exploded on impact. The other pilot was a Scotsman, Flying Officer Hamish Craig. He ejected successfully. As I have already said, I remember Artie Pollock. I recall a friendly, quiet-spoken and popular young man. At CAI, Artie was a school prefect, a leading swimmer of the first, a leading member of the first 15, captain of rowing and swimming. Can you scroll on the next slide? Yeah. So you may notice that his rowing instructor at CAI was also a Portrush man, Dan Cunningham, who taught physics at the Inst. On again. That's fine, I think I'm one over, but anyway. I also remember a morning assembly at Korean Inst the day following the tragedy. I was in third form by that time. The headmaster, Major White, always made the day's announcements and led worship. That day he was visibly moved, for Artie had been a popular and much admired pupil, as well as an outstanding student and sportsman who had joined the RAF immediately after leaving school in July 1951. Arthur James was the son of Arthur and Jane Pollock. His father was a Portrush hairdresser and barber, with a well-established business in the Catherwood Arcade, and the family resided at 23 Scarrymore Place. 6 months after joining the RAF, Artie was granted a short service commission as a student pilot. In those days, the flying schools were busy training pilots for the new jets then coming into service. Over the next year, he learned to fly Vampire. I remember that. If I got that wrong, Father would definitely have remonstrated me when I got home. And then Meteor fighter trainers. So this is the Sabre, which would have been similar to the aircraft that he would have flown. His talent was obvious, and it was not long before he was mastering the mysteries of the cockpit of the highly potent Sabre, and that was the start of 1953. Artie was posted to 67 Squadron at Wildenrath in West Germany. I believe this is Artie in the centre, about to shake hands. It was the RAF's second Sabre squadron. The RAF had acquired 400 of these US-designed fighters until Britain's own new supersonic Hawker Hunter and the Supermarine Swift fighters were ready for service. At that time, 67 was commanded by another Ulsterman, Squadron Leader William Harbison, whose father had been an RUC sergeant at Kilrea. Now, was it possible that Squadron Leader Harbison had specially asked that the 19-year-old Pollock be posted to 67? Harbison had lost his own younger brother the year before, missing, presumed killed in an offshore air crash. Squadron Leader Harbison went on to become an Air Vice Marshal, and I am sorry I never met him, for he often came home to visit the family in Kilrea, and his brother-in-law was a chronicle photographer at the time. He died in the US a few years ago at the age of 96. One of his old 67 squadron pilots, John Perrott, visited him there in 1991 and said he had mentioned, without prompting, how sad he had been at the death of Artie Pollock 40 years previously. Then a frontline unit. Much of 67 Squadron's activity at Wildenrath involved formation flying. And on the afternoon of the 6th of November, Artie Pollock was flying one of 4 Sabres airborne from B Flight. They were operating as targets for 4 Thunderjets of the Belgian Air Force in an exercise. During a change of course at 15,000 feet, 2 of the RAF Sabres collided. The other pilot ejected safely to be picked up by an army patrol within minutes of landing by parachute. Artie Pollock ejected automatically when the aircraft collided, but remained strapped in his seat as his plane's fuel tanks exploded. An official report concluded that he was probably incapacitated at the time, or in the initial impact. Pilot Officer A.J. Pollock was buried with full military honours at Cologne Military Cemetery on the 11th of November. Back in Portrush, a service in his memory was held in the Methodist Church. Artie's former minister and scoutmaster, Reverend Henry Holloway, now of Tandragee, conducted the service. The Royal Air Force, British Legion, Portrush Urban Council, Korean Academical Institution, Scouts and Cubs, and other local youth organisations were represented. The Reverend Holloway, in an impressive address, spoke of the qualities which inevitably would have made Artie a leader, and said his passing was a challenge to those on the threshold of life's adventure. Major White said that those who had known Artie at school would always honour the memory of a boy of great promise and high courage, ever willing to forget self in the interests of others. Artie Pollock was the 4th RAF pilot to be killed in 13 Sabre crashes in the course of just over a year. At the end of 3.5 years, 72 Sabres out of the 400 have been lost on service and 27 pilots killed. Now, the name of Artie Pollock is recorded on a family headstone in Ballywell Cemetery near the entrance gate. It reveals another family tragedy. Artie's sister, Lita, 3 years his senior, predeceased him in 1951 at the tender age of 21. Now, my father has said here he was always puzzled that the rank pilot officer was given on the gravestone. He estimated that Artie Pollock's length of service would have entitled him to the rank of flying officer, which normally comes automatically after 1 year's service. However, on checking the RAF record of service, he discovered that he would have received his promotion on the 8th of November, 2 days after he was killed. An announcement had been sent to the London's Gazette Air Force list, but had then subsequently been cancelled. So, you will not find Artie Pollock's name on any public war memorial or on a blue plaque on the wall of a building. But he is typical of so many young men and women from this town who over the years have offered their lives and talents in so many fields of endeavour. Some were tragically lost to us before their lives could be accomplished. Most are lost to local memory. Tonight, we have had the privilege of remembering one of them, Pilot Officer Arthur James Pollock.
Thank you very much, Raymond, for delivering such a sombre and personal recollection of our second unsung hero of the evening. Thank you very much for that.